Welcome back to Super English Talks. This is the channel where we explore not only the English language, but also the thoughts, feelings, and questions that make us human. Today's episode begins with a strange and powerful phrase: die before you die. At first, that might sound confusing or even uncomfortable. What could it possibly mean? It sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? Like a line from an old poem or a mysterious riddle. And in fact, it is. This phrase comes from ancient spiritual traditions, most famously from the 13th century Persian poet Rumi, who wrote, "Die before you die, so you do not die when you die." It sounds poetic and mysterious, but it's not really about death in the physical sense. It's not about fear, loss, or endings. It's actually about freedom. It's about letting go of the parts of ourselves that keep us stuck, our fears, our habits, our old identities, and the masks we wear every day without even realizing it. What we're really talking about is an inner death, a kind of conscious surrender, a moment when you decide to stop being who you think you should be and start becoming who you really are. Think about it this way. Have you ever wanted to start over? To reinvent yourself after a breakup, a big change, or even just a quiet moment when you looked in the mirror and thought, "I don't recognize this version of me anymore." That moment, that tiny spark of awareness, is the first whisper of dying before you die. It's the beginning of transformation. This idea appears in many places, in Sufi mysticism, in Stoic philosophy, in Buddhism, and even in modern psychology. All of them teach something similar. If you can face your ego, your fears, your attachments, and your mental patterns while you are still alive, you can experience a kind of rebirth. A second life. A clearer, lighter, and freer way of being. Why does this matter? Because so many of us live on autopilot. We wake up, go through our routines, react instead of respond, chase approval, and repeat habits that feel safe but not meaningful. We wear identities like armor. The strong one. The successful one. The nice one. But what do we lose when we hold on too tightly to those roles? What happens when we're too afraid to let go of who we think we're supposed to be? This episode is an invitation. Not to physically die, of course, but to shed, to release, to question, to look honestly at the stories and identities that shape you and ask, are they still true? Are they still mine? As we go deeper today, I'll share reflections, stories, and questions that might gently challenge how you see yourself, while helping you grow in both your English and your awareness. So, are you ready? Let's take a step into the unknown and begin the journey of dying before we die. Who are you really? Before we can let go, before we can begin to die before we die, we first need to understand what it is that we're actually holding on to. So let me ask you something and take your time with this question. Who are you? Most people, when they hear that question, answer in familiar ways. They might say, "I'm a teacher. I'm a father. I'm from Brazil. I'm an introvert. I'm a perfectionist." But are those things really you? Or are they just the roles you play, the stories you've learned to tell about yourself? That's where our exploration begins. Maybe you'd even say, "I'm the kind of person who always puts others first." And those answers are fine. They're familiar. They sound right. They fit what people expect. But if you look a little closer, you'll notice something important. Most of those answers are not really about who you are. They're about what you do, where you come from, or how you've learned to behave over time. In other words, they're layers, roles, labels, and descriptions that you've picked up along the way. Some of them were given to you early in life by your family, your culture, or your teachers. Others you collected through your experiences, your relationships, your successes and failures. Together, They form what we call a self-concept, a kind of inner story about who you are and what you stand for. And that story isn't bad. In fact, it can be very helpful. It gives you a sense of stability in a world that often feels chaotic. It helps you belong, it gives structure to your life, and it provides an easy way to introduce yourself to others. But here's where things get tricky. Over time, we start to become attached to those roles. So attached that we begin to believe they're permanent, that they define us completely. We forget that they're just one version of us, shaped by a certain time, a certain place, and a certain set of expectations. Think about it. How often have you said things like, "I could never do that, it's just not me," or, "I'm not the type of person who takes risks"? Those statements sound like facts, but they're not. They're beliefs we've accepted so deeply that we don't even notice them anymore. And when we hold on to those beliefs too tightly, our identity starts to act like armor. It protects us, yes, but it also limits us. We hide behind our job titles. We play the roles we've been given: the responsible one, the quiet one, the fixer, the strong one. We try to live in a way that matches the image we've created, even if that image no longer feels true or alive. But here's the catch. The same armor that protects us also traps us. When we cling too tightly to who we think we are, we close the door to who we might become. We limit our choices. We say no to opportunities that don't match the story we've built. We stay in relationships or jobs that no longer make us happy simply because they fit the identity we're used to. So let me ask you again, now with all of this in mind. Who are you really? If you removed all the labels, if you weren't defined by your job, your nationality, your relationship status, or your personality type, what would be left? This is where the conversation goes deeper. Because underneath all those roles and stories lies something else, something we call the ego. Now, when I say ego, I don't mean arrogance or pride. I mean the psychological sense of the word, the part of the mind that builds and maintains a sense of identity. It's the inner voice that says, "I am this. I am not that. People like me don't do things like that." It's constantly comparing, defending, and protecting the image of me that it has built over time. The ego isn't the enemy, it's actually doing its job. It's trying to keep you safe, to help you survive in a complex social world. But the problem begins when we confuse the ego for our true self. When we start to believe that this collection of roles, habits, preferences, and past experiences is all that we are. The truth is, the self is much more fluid, much more alive than we've been taught to believe. You are not a fixed character in a rigid script. You are a constantly changing story, a work in progress, always capable of becoming something new. You are a dynamic being, constantly growing, shifting, and adapting. You are not meant to stay the same forever. And if we want to live with more freedom and authenticity, we have to stop clinging to the identities that no longer serve us and start exploring what lies beneath them. I'm not going to pretend this is easy. Letting go of an identity can feel like a small kind of death. If you've always been the high achiever, who are you without the gold stars? If you've always been the caregiver, who are you when you finally put your own needs first? If your entire self-worth has been built around being the smart one or the strong one, what happens when life humbles you, when you fail, or when you fall apart? But here's the good news. Something deeper always remains. Beneath the layers of identity, beneath the surface roles and stories, there's a quieter self. A self that isn't trying to impress anyone. A self that doesn't need to perform or prove anything. A self that doesn't need validation because it already feels whole. And that's what dying before you die really means. It's not about destroying who you are. It's about releasing the illusions you've confused with your true essence. It's about loosening your grip on the costume so you can finally feel the air on your skin. So here's a question to carry with you. Which parts of your identity feel natural, and which parts feel like performance? Take a moment with that. Be honest with yourself. Because in the next part of this journey, we'll explore what it really means to let go. Not to collapse, disappear, or lose yourself, but to make space. Space for something more honest, more fluid, and more alive to emerge. The death of the ego. Not as dark as it sounds. Now that we've looked closely at the identities we wear, the roles we play, and the stories we tell ourselves, let's go even deeper into the heart of today's topic. What does it actually mean to die before you die? What is it that's supposed to die? Here's where we return to the concept of the ego. And just to be clear, when I say ego, I don't mean arrogance or pride, the way we often use it in everyday conversation. I'm talking about something much more subtle and much more universal. The ego, in this context, is the mental identity we build over time. It's made up of our beliefs, our fears, our memories, and the social conditioning that shapes how we see ourselves and how we show up in the world. And here's something important to remember. The ego is not evil. It's not some villain hiding inside you. In fact, it plays a very important role. It gives you a sense of continuity, of being someone consistent from day to day. It helps you find your place in society. It protects you emotionally and psychologically from feeling unsafe, unseen, or out of control. You could think of the ego as a kind of bodyguard. It stands in front of you, always alert, always ready to defend the version of you it believes is safe or acceptable. But here's the problem. Over time, that bodyguard can get too loud and too rigid. It starts to confuse safety with sameness. It tells you to stay small, to stick with what's familiar, to repeat old patterns. It tells you, don't change, it's risky. It convinces you that your image, your identity, your story is more important than your truth. And that's when the suffering begins. When the ego stops serving you and starts controlling you. So when we talk about the death of the ego, we're not talking about erasing your personality or losing your sense of self. We're talking about loosening your grip on the habits of mind that keep you stuck. It means stepping back from the automatic stories you tell yourself. The ones that limit your growth, that make you fearful, defensive, or closed off. The death of the ego is really a kind of mental decluttering. A gentle, quiet clearing away of old beliefs and assumptions you've outgrown. It's not violent or tragic, it's spacious. It's what makes transformation possible. Let me give you a personal example. For most of my life, I carried a strong identity as the achiever. I was the one who got things done, who always delivered, who showed up early and went the extra mile. On the surface, it looked like strength, and in many ways, it was. That achiever mindset helped me reach goals, build skills, and gain confidence. But underneath it all, it was also tied to something more fragile: fear. A fear of not being enough. A fear of becoming invisible if I didn't prove my worth through performance. So, I pushed myself. I worked longer hours than I needed to. I said yes to everything. I measured my value by how much I accomplished, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. Over time, the identity of the achiever became so deeply woven into my sense of self that I couldn't imagine existing without it. It wasn't just something I did, it was who I believed I was. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Eventually, I hit a wall. I burned out physically, emotionally, mentally. I felt exhausted, anxious, disconnected, and full of questions. And in that discomfort, something began to shift. Quietly. Slowly. I started to see that the achiever wasn't my true self, it was a survival strategy. A role I had learned to play to feel safe, valued, and seen. It wasn't permanent truth, it was protection. Letting go of that identity wasn't easy. At first, it felt like a kind of death. I felt exposed, uncertain, even lost. But with time, I realized that what I was losing wasn't myself, it was the pressure to always be someone. And in that space, something softer, truer, and more grounded began to emerge. This, in essence, is what we mean by the death of the ego. It's not a dramatic explosion. It's more like a gentle exhale, a quiet peeling away of old mental habits and emotional armor. And what remains isn't emptiness. It's a deeper version of you. A version that doesn't need to perform or prove, but simply is. And here's where language really matters. When we say, what no longer serves you, we're talking about anything, a belief, a behavior, a mindset that might have once helped you survive, but now holds you back. It could be the story that says you always have to be strong. Or the idea that you're not creative. Or the habit of judging yourself for feeling too much. These are all ego defenses, not signs of weakness, but signs of conditioning. They show how you've learned to protect yourself in a world that once felt unsafe. But the good news is this: they're not permanent. The ego is not made of stone. It's more like a costume, one you've worn for so long that you forgot it was a costume. And once you see it clearly, you can choose to take it off, piece by piece, moment by moment. So if you're listening to this and thinking, I've always been the peacekeeper. I've always been the independent one. I've never been the type to take risks. Ask yourself, is that still true? Or is that simply what I've gotten used to believing? Because when we talk about dying before you die, we're really talking about dying to those fixed identities. The ones that keep you small, safe, and predictable. So that something freer, more alive, and more real can finally be born. We're talking about letting go of who you thought you had to be. So you can finally step into who you actually are. And no, it's not grim. It's not morbid. It's liberating. Because when you stop clinging to the ego's narrow version of yourself, you make space for something wider, lighter, and more alive. A version of life that feels spacious, like you can finally breathe again. So, here's something to reflect on as we move forward. What identity are you still holding on to? Not because it feels true, but because it feels familiar. And if you were to set that identity down, even for just a moment, who might you become? Quieting the inner noise. Let's slow down for a moment. Not just in this episode, but in ourselves. Let's pause. Take a breath. Because before anything can truly shift, before we can let go, change direction, or even see ourselves clearly, we need to look at something most of us live with every day, but rarely notice directly. The constant stream of thoughts running through our minds. We all have it, that inner voice. Sometimes it sounds like our own. Sometimes it sounds like a parent, a teacher, or some critical version of ourselves that we picked up long ago. And it never really stops, does it? It's like a quiet radio in the background, always playing, always narrating, always judging. It worries, it compares, it replays old conversations and rehearses new ones that might never happen. It whispers, what if I fail? What if I said the wrong thing? What if I'm not good enough? This is what we call mental chatter, and while it might seem harmless, it has a powerful effect on how we feel and how we live. Over time, this constant noise shapes our experience of reality. It creates tension in the body. It fuels anxiety. It keeps us caught in cycles of self-doubt and overthinking. You've probably heard phrases like, I'm in my own head, or I went down a rabbit hole. Both describe that familiar spiral, when our thoughts take over, looping endlessly without resolution. Have you ever noticed how much energy it takes to think about the same problem over and over without ever actually solving it? That's rumination. It's like chewing the same piece of gum long after it's lost its flavor. But you just keep chewing. And it's not only about regrets or mistakes. We ruminate on possibilities. We overthink decisions. We second-guess our choices. We worry about how we're being perceived. It's exhausting. But because everyone does it, it starts to feel normal. We rarely stop and ask, is this actually helping me? Now, don't get me wrong, thinking isn't the enemy. Our ability to think, reflect, and plan is one of the most extraordinary gifts we have as human beings. The problem begins when the mind becomes noisy, when it spins endlessly without awareness. That's when we lose touch with something deeper, something quieter, something wiser. We lose presence. We miss what's happening right now in this moment. So, what's the alternative? Should we try to stop thinking altogether? Not exactly. The goal isn't to silence the mind completely. That's nearly impossible. The goal is to observe it, to create a little space between you and your thoughts. Because the moment you can observe your thoughts instead of automatically believing them or following them, something changes. You reclaim a sense of inner freedom. You realize that you are not your thoughts. You are the one who sees them. And that realization opens the door to peace. One of the most powerful questions you can ask yourself is this: if I'm the one who can notice my thoughts, then who am I really? When was the last time you simply noticed your thoughts without reacting to them? You might be surprised by what you find when you try. Most people, maybe most of us, never actually watch the mind with curiosity. We're so identified with our thoughts that we forget something essential. We are not the voice in the head. We are the one who hears it. And this is where certain practices become incredibly powerful. Not because they're trendy, but because they train us to relate to our thoughts in a completely new way. Take mindfulness, for example. It can be as simple as sitting quietly, breathing, and observing without judgment. Not trying to control your thoughts or push them away, but letting them come and go naturally. Like clouds drifting across an open sky. Another helpful tool is journaling. Not the kind where you write perfectly structured sentences or deep reflections, but the raw kind where you simply spill your thoughts onto the page, freely and honestly. When you do that, something interesting happens. The act of writing them down creates distance. You begin to see patterns. You notice which thoughts come from fear, which ones echo someone else's voice, and which, if any, actually deserve your attention. And then there's breath work. Even something as simple as pausing to take 3 slow, deep breaths can change everything. It sounds basic, but it's powerful. It interrupts the mental noise and brings you back into your body, into this very moment. Because the breath is always happening now. Not in the past. Not in the future. But right here, where life actually unfolds. These practices don't eliminate your thoughts. They simply help you remember the truth. You are not your thoughts. When you can remember that, when you can watch your mind without getting pulled into every worry, doubt, or judgment, you begin to discover something deeper. A quiet space beneath the noise. A kind of inner stillness. And from that stillness, clarity arises. So does creativity and a genuine sense of self-awareness. You begin to see how many of your thoughts are built on outdated fears, false assumptions, or old habits of judgment. You realize the mind often resists change, not because change is bad, but because the ego feels safer when things stay the same. Even if the same isn't making you happy. So here's a gentle challenge for the next time you feel anxious, overwhelmed, or mentally cluttered. Don't rush to fix it. Don't try to think your way out of it. Just pause. Breathe. Observe. Notice what happens when you stop reacting and start witnessing. You may be amazed at how the energy begins to shift. And maybe, just maybe, the next time your inner voice starts to spiral, you'll recognize it for what it is. A well-meaning narrator. But not the whole story. The liberating power of letting go. Let's pause again for a moment and imagine something together. Picture yourself walking through life carrying a heavy backpack. You've been carrying it for so long that you've stopped noticing the weight. But it's always there. Every step takes more effort than it should. Now, imagine looking inside that backpack. It's not full of useful things, no tools, no food, nothing that truly serves you. Instead, it's packed with old fears, outdated stories, impossible expectations, and beliefs about who you're supposed to be. Some of those things aren't even yours. They were handed to you by your family, your culture, your past experiences. Now, take a moment and imagine what it would feel like to stop walking. To take that backpack off your shoulders, and to simply set it down. That's what we're talking about today. The liberating power of letting go. Because once you start to see the mental and emotional patterns you've been carrying, the identities, the inner stories, the habits of control, you realize something important. You have a choice. The ego doesn't like uncertainty. It wants to know. It wants to plan, to predict, to control. But life, real life, doesn't move in straight lines. It unfolds. It surprises. It asks us to trust. And that trust is the heart of letting go. It's not passive. It's not resignation. It's a quiet kind of strength that says, I don't know what's next, but I'm willing to make space for it. Because when you stop clinging to what was, you open yourself to what is. And in that opening, life can finally reach you. Opportunities, insights, connections, they start to flow again. Not because you forced them, but because you stopped blocking them with fear and control. Letting go doesn't erase the past. It simply loosens its grip on the present. It's the moment you stop arguing with reality and start listening to it. And that's where a quiet kind of peace begins to emerge. You might notice small things first. A little more patience. A deeper breath. A sense of ease in moments that used to feel tense. These are signs that the space you created inside yourself is starting to fill with something real. Presence, aliveness, authenticity. Because when you release what no longer fits, you don't become less of yourself. You become more of yourself. More grounded. More whole. More in tune with life as it actually is. Not as the ego insists it should be. And maybe that's what dying before you die truly means. Not an ending, but a return. A return to simplicity. To truth. To the part of you that was always free beneath the layers. So, as we come to this part of our journey, I'll leave you with one final reflection. What might become possible if you stopped trying to hold it all together? If you allowed yourself to soften, to release, to trust that what's meant for you doesn't need to be chased or controlled, only welcomed? Because letting go isn't the end of something. It's the beginning of everything real. But authenticity isn't loud. It doesn't need to announce itself or seek validation. It moves quietly, like water finding its natural path. And as you start to live from that deeper place, you might notice that life feels lighter, not because it's easier, but because you're no longer fighting yourself. You stop needing to prove your worth through constant doing. You stop chasing approval in rooms that were never meant to see you. You stop apologizing for your sensitivity, your slowness, your truth. And in that letting be, something miraculous happens. You begin to feel at home in your own skin, in your own timing, in your own unfolding. Rebirth isn't about becoming more. It's about becoming real. It's remembering what you are beneath the noise, beneath the masks, beneath the striving. And the truth is, who you are doesn't need to be earned. It doesn't need to be fixed. It only needs to be remembered. So as you move forward, I invite you to treat yourself gently, to honor the parts of you that are still soft, still learning, still opening. Let the old fall away at its own pace. Let the new take root slowly, without rush or pressure. Because the seed doesn't force itself to bloom, it simply trusts the light. And maybe that's what dying before you die is really about. It's the slow, sacred art of remembering what's true. The practice of loosening your grip on who you thought you had to be, so you can finally breathe as who you already are. So take a deep breath. Feel the space that's been created inside you. That's not emptiness. That's freedom. And as you step into whatever comes next, carry this with you. You are not your roles. You are not your fears. You are not the stories you've outgrown. You are the awareness beneath them all. Vast, quiet, and alive. Maybe a micro-death happens when you finally decide not to respond to that message that pulls you back into an old pattern. Or when you say no to something that doesn't feel right, even if it disappoints someone. It might happen in the quiet moment when you stop defending your opinion just to be right, and instead choose peace over winning. A micro-death can be as subtle as catching yourself judging someone and choosing compassion instead, or noticing that familiar wave of self-criticism rise up, and this time, not believing it. Each of these moments, small, almost invisible, is a kind of surrender. A gentle dying of the old self that runs on fear, pride, or habit. And then, right after that letting go, a micro-rebirth happens. Something opens. You breathe a little easier. You feel lighter. You respond differently. You see a new possibility. That's how transformation really works, not through massive leaps, but through countless small openings of awareness repeated over time. You start noticing yourself changing in ways that no one else might see. You laugh more easily. You stop needing every situation to go your way. You become less reactive, more grounded, more alive. These are the quiet signs that rebirth is happening, that the you underneath the noise is beginning to lead. And yes, some days you'll still fall back into old patterns. We all do. But even that can be part of the process. Because now, when you fall, you notice. And that noticing itself is awareness. It's another small awakening, another reminder that you're growing. So maybe dying before you die isn't one big event. It's a way of living. A daily practice of release. Of letting old versions of you gently fade, so that more presence, more truth, more life can flow through. And when you start to live like that, you realize something quietly profound. You don't have to force transformation. You just have to stop resisting it. Every moment becomes an invitation to die to what's false and be reborn to what's real. Maybe it's saying no to something that drains you, even when part of you feels guilty for doing it. That small no is a tiny act of courage. It's a little death of the old habit, the one where you always said yes to please others, even when it cost you your peace. Saying no isn't selfish. It's a quiet form of self-respect. It's the beginning of a new pattern, a small rebirth, where you start honoring your own needs, your energy, your limits. Or maybe it's changing a habit that no longer feels right for who you are now. It could be something simple, like taking a new route home from work to clear your mind. Or something deeper, like choosing to stop replaying an old story that keeps you stuck in regret or fear. Every time you interrupt an automatic pattern, every time you pause, breathe, and choose differently, You are practicing this inner death and inner rebirth. Another example? Apologizing sincerely when you've made a mistake. That can feel like a small death too, a death of pride, a letting go of the image of being right or perfect all the time. But that moment of humility creates space for something new to grow. Real connection, honesty, and healing. It's hard. It takes courage. But it's freeing. The death we're talking about here isn't physical. It's emotional. It's mental. It's about letting go of impulses. The need to always be in control, the habit of reacting automatically. It's about slowing down long enough to ask yourself, am I reacting out of habit or am I responding with intention? That's a powerful question. Because when you stop and look closely, you might notice that so much of what we do every day is on autopilot. We respond to people, to challenges, to emotions, the same way we always have, simply because it's familiar. But when you pause, even for a few seconds, you give yourself the chance to choose differently, to move through discomfort instead of running from it. And that's where growth lives. Growth isn't easy. It's uncomfortable, awkward, sometimes even painful. But those tiny moments of awareness, when you let go of a reaction, when you drop a limiting belief, when you step outside your comfort zone, they're small openings into a new version of you. Think about the last time you experienced something like this. Maybe you stopped yourself from snapping in frustration and chose silence instead. Maybe you finally asked for help instead of pretending you had everything under control. Maybe you forgave someone or yourself. Those moments might have felt small, but they're not small at all. They're the quiet building blocks of transformation. And here's the beautiful thing. You don't have to wait for a major life crisis or some big turning point to begin this process. You can start right now in this moment. You can check in with yourself once or twice a day and simply ask, what am I holding on to right now? What can I gently let go of? How can I show up a little more fully, a little more honestly? Because life is made of these moments. And when you begin to practice small deaths and small rebirths every day, you create a natural rhythm, a dance of release and renewal. You begin to move through life with more grace, more awareness, more ease. So, as you go forward, try noticing your own micro-deaths and micro-rebirths. Catch yourself when you're on autopilot. Pause, breathe, and gently guide yourself back to intention. Let the discomfort of change remind you that you are alive and growing, not failing. And most of all, remember, this isn't something you finish. There's no final destination, no perfect version of you waiting at the end. This is a lifelong journey of showing up imperfectly, beautifully, and authentically, every single day. As we've been exploring the idea of dying before you die, it's helpful to step back and look at how this theme shows up across different cultures, stories, and traditions. What's remarkable is that, time and again, people in very different places and eras recognize the same truth. True transformation often requires a kind of death. Not a physical death, but an inner letting go, a shedding of old habits, old beliefs, old identities, before something new can grow. Take the poetry of Rumi, the 13th century Persian mystic and Sufi teacher. His poems are full of images of spiritual death and rebirth, the soul dissolving into the beloved, the ego burning away to reveal the light beneath. For Rumi, dying before you die is an invitation to move beyond the small, limited self, to experience a deep connection with the divine, and to live fully in the present moment. Paradoxically, it is the loss of the old self that allows true life to appear. We can also see this idea in stories that are closer to our modern culture. Joseph Campbell's famous concept of the hero's journey is one example. In these stories, The hero often undergoes a symbolic death, a descent into darkness or the underworld, before they can return changed, stronger, and wiser. That descent is essential. It is a surrender, a facing of fears, a letting go of the old identities that no longer serve. Without it, the journey is incomplete. Buddhist philosophy offers another perspective that connects deeply with this theme. Non-attachment teaches that clinging to people, possessions, or ideas creates suffering. True freedom comes from letting go even of things we think define us. And that letting go is not loss. It is liberation. It is a daily practice of dying to old ways of seeing and being, and opening to compassion, awareness, and life as it is. Even in films and books, we see the same pattern. Take Inside Out, for example. The main character learns to accept the complexity of her emotions and release her simple ideas of happiness. Or in novels where characters shed old roles, beliefs, or fears, discovering a truer sense of self. Across cultures, centuries, and mediums, the message is the same. To become who we truly are, something must end. Something inside us must die so something new can live. Now I want you to reflect for a moment. What story have you been telling yourself about who you have to be? Is it the story of the perfect achiever? The loyal friend? The strong provider? Or the person who never makes mistakes? And where did that story come from? Is it really yours, or is it a script passed down by family, culture, or past experiences? When we begin to notice these stories, we create space to question them. We can ask, do these stories still serve me? Do they reflect my truth or someone else's expectations? And perhaps slowly, we can begin to write new stories, stories that are freer, truer, and more alive. Transformation isn't just about changing what you do. It's about changing the narrative you live by. And when that story changes, everything else in life can change too. In this way, dying before you die is not just a personal journey. It is a shared human experience, a thread that connects us across time, across culture, across the world, reminding us that to truly live, we must first be willing to let go. As we come to the end of this episode, I want to leave you with a thought, a simple, gentle idea that has guided many seekers, thinkers, and ordinary people through their own journeys of change. The phrase, "die before you die," isn't about giving up. Not at all. It's about waking up. Imagine for a moment that the ego, that noisy, protective, performing part of you, isn't something to be destroyed or feared. Instead, letting go of the ego is like opening a door to a wider, fuller experience of life. You're not losing yourself. You're discovering more of who you truly are. This shift is subtle, yet profound. It's like a butterfly leaving its chrysalis. The old self falls away, but you don't vanish. You transform. You spread new wings. Here's a question to hold gently in your mind. What would change if you truly believed that nothing essential, nothing that is truly you, can ever be lost? Your core, your true self, your essential being is always there, waiting beneath the stories, the fears, the habits. When we live with that trust, fear softens. The fear of loss, the fear of change, they start to feel less like threats and more like doorways. Every ending contains a beginning. Every small death holds the possibility of new life. You don't have to have all the answers right now. The journey inward is ongoing. Sometimes it's winding, sometimes smooth, and that's perfectly okay. Curiosity and kindness toward yourself will carry you far. As you move forward, keep asking yourself gentle questions. When was the last time I truly listened to my inner voice? How much of my life am I living with intention? What small death can I embrace today to invite a rebirth tomorrow? transformation isn't a single event. It's a daily practice. It lives in the small choices, the quiet moments, and the willingness to let go and show up again over and over. If this episode has touched something inside you, I encourage you to share it. Talk about it. Write about it. Sit with it in silence. Make it part of your ongoing conversation with yourself. Because to die before you die is, in the end, to live fully, to be truly, deeply alive. Thank you for being here with me on Super English Talks. Keep exploring. Keep growing. Keep coding your own story, one word, one breath, one moment at a time.